I'm going to share it so you guys can see a beautiful image.
All right, everyone, time
And
to
let's just kick it
dance.
off because you know what? It's
It's
freaking Friday.
Friday.
Well, it's the end of the week. Now, where you been? Well, now it's Feedback Friday, so come on in. Come sit down and stare at your screen. We got a presenter that you never seen. We're Feedback Friday. We're on the loose. We'll be the train. You be the caboose. It's Feedback Friday with Kathy and Amy. Mashed potatoes and the gravy. It's Feedback Friday all day long. Feedback, feedback, Feedback Friday.
I am trying to unmute and finally got it.
And I didn't make the song play twice.
Okay,
There's that.
already A for
Yes.
effort.
Go, Kathy, go.
Welcome everyone to Feedback Friday number 34. Oh my goodness, 34 episodes of lots of great information, and today is going to be the same. So just to get our intros and stuff done, welcome everyone. I'm Kathy Hottori, president of Botanical Colors, and we are based in Seattle, Washington. And oh, you have a whole bunch of people, Tilka. And we are a natural dye supplier, as well as have a custom dye house in Seattle. Okay, I got to read here. So yeah, 34 episodes. So that just means like in a few weeks, we'll have done this for like a year, right? That's amazing.
Ridiculous.
That's amazing. Well, good news is that, you know, the vaccine trials and results are looking pretty good. So fingers crossed. So before we start, I just want to say thank you to everyone. This has been a really difficult time, and it's getting, I hate to say this, it's getting worse. So if you can stay safe, stay safe. I know it's going to be, at least it's sunny today here in Seattle, and I saw that Helen has blue skies behind her in Arizona. So yeah, there's sunshine, and we've just got to keep ourselves healthy until they finally, we really kind of dampen it down and we can be together again. So Amy's going to be our moderator, and she'll monitor the chat, which we will turn on at the end of Melonie's presentation. Melonie is going to be just audio only. She's actually lives rurally and has a pretty fragile internet connection. So we've got her PowerPoint here on Amy's computer, and Amy will be running it. So Melonie will say next slide every time she wants us to change, and she'll be coming in over audio. We're hoping at the end of the presentation, we'll be able to have her stream her video as well, so we can at least see her beautiful face and say hi and listen to her answer questions. Well, everybody should be muted for the presentation, and then we will get started. Oh, we're recording the call, and so you will have access to this. We'll send out an email in a few days with all of the resources that Melonie's speaking about, information, web links, as well as the actual recording itself. To introduce our speaker, Melonie Ancheta has been studying pigments for more than 40 years and traditional native pigments for more than 25. She's located here in the Pacific Northwest. We're so lucky to have her knowledge and experience up here. And her work is to analyze and properly identify pigments and to assist museums, conservators, collectors, artists, and scholars to determine the materials, tools, and techniques used in Native American paints. This information is used in the restoration, conservation, and appropriate storage and care of Native American artifacts, and to teach contemporary artists how to use traditional materials. Through her extensive multidisciplinary research of pigments and color use, Melonie is recognized by such prestigious institutions as the Smithsonian, the American Museum of Natural History, and many others as the sole keeper of knowledge and authority on traditional Northwest Coast native pigments and paint technology. She's also become one of the leading experts on the blue mineral pigment vivianite and its diverse formations, characteristics, and behaviors. Melonie is the author of Revealing Blue on the Northern Northwest Coast, which discusses her vivianite research. So I'm not done. She's still got like lots of great, amazing credentials here. Melonie is the founder and director of Native Paint Revealed and Pigments Revealed, and you can see her studio work at Copper Woman Studio. She's also the founder and organizer of Pigments Revealed Symposium 2021. So this is going to be the first international cross-disciplinary natural pigment symposium in the United States. We can't wait to see this happen. And we're so excited to have Melonie here. And Melonie, I just want to welcome you. I know we can't see you just yet, but we will see you soon. And thank you for joining us. Please take it away.
Okay.
Melonie, want me to get your present?
Can you hear me okay, Kathy?
Yep. Yes, we can. All right.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Kathy?
We can hear you, Melonie.
Melonie,
Oh,
we can hear
okay.
you great. Yeah. Oh, we also, audience, we have a bit of a delay due
Okay,
to
good.
the online connection. So there was going to be like a couple of beats before she responds.
And Tilka's on standby. Yeah.
Oh, Tilka's going to be my backup for.
She's your
Okay.
backup. Yep.
Okay, good.
I'm gonna share the screen, okay, Melonie?
Connection is not very good.
Okay.
So are we up and running now? Have you got the presentation up?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, I can go.
Yep.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking the time this morning to be here. I really want to thank Amy and Kathy for making this all happen, and all of you for taking the time to come and listen to me today. I can't get most people to stand still long enough. I'm Melonie Ancheta, like they said, and I've been working with pigments for quite a long time. About 25 years ago, I began focusing specifically on Northwest Coast indigenous traditional pigments, paint technology, and color use. I started asking some questions about, what made some of the traditional colors, and absolutely nobody could answer me. So I ended up getting this job by default. I'm an incredibly curious person to begin with. And, the fact that nobody can answer my questions just makes me want to dig into something. But for more than 4,000 years, the people of the Northwest Coast have used the same four colors in spite of all outside events and influences, almost total cultural devastation, and nowadays the enormous array of colors that are available. When I started out, my questions were, what were the materials used for pigments? Why those specific materials? How were they used? And why have those colors persisted in use for so long? Well, these questions have dragged me out of bed every morning and often in the middle of the night, unfortunately. And after a long and peripatetic journey, I've come up with a couple of answers. Slide, Amy. Let me know when you've got the new slide up, please, Amy.
The new slides there, Melonie.
Okay, thanks. About 15 years ago, I was very fortunate to be connected with a wonderful geologist named George Musto at Western Washington University here in my hometown. And he very generously and graciously has let me use the geology lab at the university. And he's been just a wonderful help with his knowledge and experience. This is an image of me in the lab, and the odd looking thing in front of me is a scanning electron microscope, EDAX. If you aren't familiar with a scanning electron microscope, find one in your town and go and talk the person who runs it into letting you put things in there and look at them, because you can see really cool stuff magnified like a bazillion times. I think that this is just one of the best inventions ever. I've actually taken my grandkids up there and let them, look at different things in it. The technologies that I use identify materials, but they also give me really critical insights into the past. I have a whole slew of comics about cave art. Here's this image is, oh, sorry, Amy, slide.
Yep, it's there.
Okay. I don't care who picks on me because I'm using technology. I'm going to stick with it. Next slide.
Yep.
This is a highly magnified paint sample from a totem pole I did some conservation work on a few years ago. And the one thing that I regret about the scanning electron microscope is that we don't get to see things in color. It's my understanding that they have them now where you can get color images, but the university can't afford one yet. So I'm stuck with black and white. This was a very tiny paint sample, and what you're actually looking at on the left-hand corner on the bottom is the first layer of paint that was applied right after the pole was carved. The next layer is a second layer of paint that was applied, some years later. We don't know when anymore. And the third layer is the final coat that was applied about 30 years ago before we started doing the conservation on it. I use this as a demonstration. It's not very exciting in and of itself, other than to show that you can distinguish paint layers here. But the thing that really excited me about this is when we run the analysis on it, there was a very high concentration of bone ash in that first paint layer and in the cedar substrate. Totem poles are typically carved out of cedar, and bone ash is not a normal component in any kind of paint that I'm aware of, and it's certainly not something that you typically find in cedar. And I, went home and I thought about why there would be so much bone ash in the first layer of paint in the cedar, but not in the second two layers. It didn't make a lot of sense. And I did some research on the pole itself, and the documentation that came with it said that it had been carved in downtown Wrangell, Alaska in the late 1940s. And I actually knew who this artist was, and I knew a bit of his history, and was aware that he did not live in downtown Wrangell in the late 1940s. He was living in one of the native villages, out in the, away from the cities. And in the 1940s, in the native villages, they were still cooking over open fires, whereas in the cities, they were using gas and electric stoves. And that made me think about, when you're cooking over an open fire, if you're, roasting meat and things like that, you're going to get some kind of residue from the bones. And I went back and talked with George at the lab, and he said that I was on the right track, that it was very likely, bone ash from all the cooking fires. that's a very small detail, but it actually helped to correct the documentation on this pole, and it added information to the carver's, you know, history too. A lot of times when you're working with objects in museums, well, most of the time you don't have any documentation, and often what you do get is incomplete or incorrect. So every opportunity we have to, you know, improve that is really important. Next slide.
Okay.
The SEM EDAX, it also identifies, as well as magnifying things, it also identifies all the elements that are present in a sample. This is a printout of some of the elemental data for a vivianite sample. The elemental data identifies all of the components, all of the elemental components of a compound. And in this image, the upper portion, the with the red peaks, that just is telling us that, you know, there's a really high peak for phosphorus, there's a high peak for iron, and then there are traces of magnesium, calcium, and I can't actually see what the other one is. So, but those are, you know, typical for vivianite. The bottom portion lists the atomic weights of each of the elements that are present. And that's the really important part for me. Using atomic weights, I can match a sample, say from an artifact or, you know, a pigment that you hand me, back to a deposit. It's in looking at those matching weights where you can prove that something came from a certain place. It is also really useful in identifying sibling artifacts. Those are artifacts that are made by the same person. It helps in determining authorship, and it certainly helps in determining authenticity of a piece of work. It looks like we might be able to do some provenancing using elemental data like this, and it's very useful for storage and conservation of artifacts. This is the end of the technological part of my little spiel here. So we'll get to the good stuff now. Next slide. This is what I call cultural conflation. I did a general Google search a while back and just typed in Native American colors. I do that periodically just to see if it's improved. Cultural conflation is where a large group of people have decided that another group of people all have the same beliefs, practices, you know, they use the same colors. And this is what comes up when you type in Native American colors. It's wildly untrue, and it's, you know, it's just a real problem. Partly because there are actually more than 1,600 indigenous culture groups in the US. Of those, almost 200 of them are here on the Northwest coast. There are more than 200 distinct languages spoken by natives in the US, and they're spread across a landmass of more than 9 million square miles. That's a lot of territory and a lot of people for the outside world to say are all the same. What this does is it erases cultural individuality. It denies thousands and thousands of years of traditions and customs, beliefs, and lives that are founded on a rich history of place, events, and lives. It's basically the same as saying all Europeans and all Asians are the same. And I dare you to tell a Frenchman he's the same as an Englishman without having to duck. slide.
Yep.
Thanks, Amy. Every indigenous culture had a traditional palette that was based on what was available to them locally. On the Northwest coast, there are 4 main pigments that are abundant and that I've actually proven have been used for at least 4,000 years through radiocarbon dating of pigment grinding stones. I'm currently working with an archaeologist, hopefully, to identify earlier dates on objects that have come out of wet sites. On a lot of objects here in the West Coast, they're in a what's called a wet site because it's been underwater. And those objects, often you can't see any pigment present anymore, just with the naked eye. But if you run it through some kind of XRF spectroscopy or a couple of other technologies, you're able to register any pigments that were ever applied to the object. And I'm hoping to get some earlier dates because I just absolutely believe that humans have been using color, actually humans and Neanderthals have been using color for literally hundreds of thousands of years. I just recently read that the earliest use of red ochre is dated at 307,000 years, which just thrills me to death. Slide.
Yep. It's there.
Next slide, Aim.
Yep, I got it for you.
These are some of the, okay, thanks. These are some of the pigment sites that are relatively close to where I live. I really believe that it's important to rely on local colors, particularly if you're doing some kind of traditional work. In Native cultures, we believe in spirit of place, in what's called spirit of place, and that this spirit imbues the resources from that place with, some kind of innate power. Spirit of place, to many of us, gives pigments meaning. It gives them content and a life of their own that becomes part of the power of that pigment, and it contributes, it contributed anyway, to how and why they were used. It also, there's also a cultural relationship that has developed with local places. The people of the community have helped to steward this land for thousands of years, and they've used those resources, and quite often there are stories or events or something else that is associated with a particular place that lends it special meaning. This gives your materials an intrinsic value and power that takes the material beyond something that's just useful and pretty. Not long ago, a medicine person from one of the Southwest culture groups contacted my amazing friend and colleague, who I've dubbed the Ochre Whisperer, aka Heidi Gustafson. That's what she goes by in, her other life. Heidi referred back to me because she knew that I would have an opinion on this. I have an opinion on most things. And I recommended that she tell him to look closer to his own environment, that he go out and look for pigments in his own neighborhood, because those were very likely the ones that his ancestors used, that his culture had identified with for thousands of years, and more than likely that his grandparents used, and that they would have a much more personal and spiritual meaning to his work. We talked about the possibility of him obtaining pigments, say, from Western Washington, and doing some kind of a ritual ceremony to imbue them with spiritual content. But there's something lacking in that, at least from my point of view. I really can't stress enough how important I think it is for people to look close to where they live. You're very likely to find some kind of wonderful colors within a mile of where you live. Slide.
Yep.
A while back, I was challenged by a guy just flatly stating, paint is fundamentally simple, pigment and a binding agent. And I popped off with, no, it's not. The elemental composition of pigments causes behavioral characteristics that change with each type of binder. If you have ever, mixed oils with a pigment and painted with them, you have experienced the pigments darkening in color. Whereas if you use watercolor, they don't. Or if you use egg tempera, you'll see that the egg yolk will darken the pigment, and often it will add a slight greenish cast to, or a yellowish cast. But there are other factors that enter into this too, such as light. We all know about the instability of some colors. Proximity to other elements, proximity to things like arsenic and, I just blanked out on the other one. There are a couple of different heavy metals that can cause some pigments to change color. Some pigments change color the more they oxidize, the more they're out in the air. And there are a whole slew of other variables over which we may or may not have control, and which we may or may not even know about yet. There's a great deal of research being done in Europe about pigments, and a lot of really helpful information is coming out of that. This is an image of a beautiful Tlingit clan hat that was carved in the mid-1800s. The paint on it is vivianite, and it was applied with just water. That's really typical of Northwest Coast objects, for vivianite to be applied with just water, largely because when it's applied with oil, it darkens and will often look really black. It also changes the patina and gives it a satin finish, a reflective satin finish, rather than this beautiful matte finish that you see here. What I want you to notice, though, about this are the fingerprints, the darkenings around the brim of the hat. You can see how it's been handled. And that's the result of just the oils from our fingertips mixing with this paint and discoloring it. It actually has told me several different things over the years. It's shown me, from looking at a large number of these types of hats, how carefully they are handled by seeing how few fingerprints are on them and where those fingerprints are placed. But it's also taught me a lot about how vivianite reacts with all kinds of different things. Slide.
Yep.
Every mineral pigment has its own characteristics and behaviors, but out of everything I've worked with, vivianite has got to be the poster child for pigment complexity. For every question I've answered about this mineral, it has given me at least 50 more that need to be answered. I could probably spend 10 lifetimes and never fully understand or know what this material is going to do. Vivianite is a really simple elemental compound of iron and phosphorus. I mean, two very basic elements that are extremely important here on Earth. It forms from any kind of decomposing organic material, and iron in an anaerobic condition. I mean, you can actually grow it in your compost bin if you put a lid on it. Decomposing matter can be vegetable, it can be from animals, humans, and even from human and animal waste. As long as there is a little bit of iron present and a lack of oxygen, vivianite forms. It, I like to think of it one of the most interesting recycling cycles. This ability of vivianite to form from death and decomposition is actually part of what made it a really powerful spiritual protective agent here on the Northwest Coast. In the image here, the top left-hand image is the first vivianite that I ever got hands on. It's a piece of Pleistocene era cedar that was embedded in a vivianite deposit out on the Olympic Peninsula here in Washington. The one underneath it is obviously a human skull with vivianite very happily growing in it. And then the third one is a fossil mammoth tusk that was found in Alaska. They find quite a lot of these in Alaska, and it is almost completely taken over with vivianite. Vivianite has a particular affinity for calciferous materials, and I believe that that helped to, that was one of the things that contributed to the concept that it was spiritually potent here. Northwest Coast people have a belief that you have to treat the bones of an animal that you've harvested very respectfully, and you have a proper little ritual that you do when you return them back to the earth, and that will allow the animal to come back to life and continue providing nourishment. That belief in the bones having some kind of a spiritual ability to regenerate animals, I believe, is a large part of the reason why the people here really really relied on vivianite for spiritual powers. The next slide.
Yep, you got it.
In addition to that, if we didn't have enough interesting stuff about vivianite, it's also a transformational material. Again, on the Northwest Coast, transformation is a really important part of the cosmology and how people believe. In the old days, people and animals were able to transform from one to the other. You can, there's a belief that absolutely everything has, spirit and has a life, including rocks and plants and mountains and streams and everything. And that all of those things in old times could transform into other things. So transformation is really important here. The ability of vivianite to form in different states is really important. You can find it as an earth, it forms as stones, and it forms as crystals. And it often takes two forms in like the same body. This is a just amazing looking little clamshell here with vivianite riddling the shell itself. The dark part inside is actually some vivianite crystals surrounded by, I guess, what I would just have to call like a clay type stuff, but it's all vivianite. And I think that this ability for it to form into a number of different states is also part of why, it was used spiritually here. Slide.
Yep.
Okay, now for vivianite's final magic act. It changes color. It's white when it's first exposed. And then as, the longer it's exposed to light, it turns blue through a photochemical reaction that's that I used to think was just caused by UV light, but actually it occurs like in my kitchen under, ordinary electric light. After studying and working with this material for so long, I've begun questioning whether it's a true mineral. I think that we need to create a new classification called biotic minerals. Because I actually got a little bit ahead of myself here. What these are is they're actually just all the same thing. The first image is a little nodule of vivianite that my colleague Heidi Gustafson got down on the coast of Oregon a few months ago. And you can see that we broke it open and the interior is white. The image to the side of that is the same nodule 15 minutes later, and on the bottom is at half an hour. By half an hour, it in my kitchen, in ordinary kitchen light, it had turned this shade of blue. And typically, when you find vivianite as an earth like this, it is very, very fine. And you just have to do a minor grinding on it to get a really good pigment grade or paint grade pigment. What I was saying about vivianite, about a new classification of biotic minerals, vivianite, although it is called a mineral because it forms out of organic matter and because it has an actual life process and so many different behaviors, vivianite does actually have a life process where it starts out as organic matter and changes into these other states, and it eventually decays and turns back into, well, I don't actually know what yet, but I think that all of these characteristics, I'm pretty sure that all these characteristics were known to early people. They had a much more intimate relationship with their landscape, with the materials and things that they found in nature than we do. And so they would have observed these things happening. I think that I haven't been able to find any other cultures anywhere in the world who use vivianite spiritually. I think that most cultures steered away from it because of its associations with death and decay. And why it was used here on the Northwest Coast, why people weren't afraid of it here on the Northwest Coast, it still puzzles me. But I do think that all of these different characteristics and behaviors of it really lent to the idea that it had some spiritual power. Next slide.
Yep.
These are all Tlingit artifacts. The top two are a shaman's mask and a shaman's rattle. They are, all four of them are Tlingit. And the Tlingits have occupied Southeast Alaska for thousands of years now. And they've built an incredibly rich material culture and a highly sophisticated art form. The two pieces on the bottom are war helmets, and they were worn on top of the head and had a gorget that covered the lower half of the face and the man's throat and upper chest. And they're carved out of hardwoods. In the past, the people here who needed the most powerful spiritual protection were the shamans and the warriors. The shamans needed it because they moved between worlds. They were able to cross planes and they dealt with spirits all the time. And so they had to have a very strong protection. And so far in all of the the shaman's accoutrement that I've looked at, I've only found a handful of pieces that did not have any vivianite paint on them. And the same with the war helmets. Warriors, because they lived in a liminal zone like shamans do, in a state between life and death. You know, the young men from very early age joined a warrior society, and from that point on, they lived in that liminal zone between life and death. So they also needed a strong spiritual protection. And out of all the warrior helmets that I've looked at, there are, I think, were 3 that I found that do not have vivianite on them. It's difficult to see on these 2, but it is there. On most of the helmets, it's actually worn off or been washed off because, you know, they were outside in all kinds of elements all the time. It's incredibly rare to find vivianite on mundane or daily objects, you know, things that were used for, you know, just ordinary household use or otherwise. It is only found on shamans and warrior gear and on regalia that was used for ceremonies and rituals. Slide.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the transformational qualities of vivianite are either unknown or are being ignored by the people who are caring for artifacts in museum collections. It's costing us precious cultural heritage information as well as the artifacts themselves. The artifacts are degrading because of improper care. This chest is one that was carved by a Haida master carver named Albert Edward Edenshaw in the mid-1800s. This chest, studying it for about 25 years now, and over the years, I've noted that the blue paint on it, which is vivianite, has started to darken significantly. The reason that that's happening is because the area of the museum in which this and a whole bunch of other objects are housed is a giant glass room. And when I brought the color changes to the attention of the head conservator, I discovered that they have no UV filters in this giant fishbowl. And I'm trying to work with the actual families. These cultural heritage objects in our museums actually belong to certain families, and I'm able to go back to the family of Albert Edward Edenshaw and say, this is happening to this. There's a problem, and you need to correct it. They have the power to influence the museums to make these changes to protect our objects. Slide.
Yep.
This is a chest by the same artist. You can't see it in the photographs, unfortunately, but if you're standing in front of it, you can just barely see traces of blue paint down in the bottom right-hand corner. But what I want you to notice about this is you can no longer see any blue. You can see the black form lines, the black outlines, and then you can see the black pupils. But around those, you can see darkened areas. Those all used to be blue. This brings up some serious questions about what's being lost with the color alteration of vivianite, but also, you know, color alteration for other pigments. Cinnabar was used here, and it also changes color and will turn black. Vermilion turns black. I mean, synthetic, the cinnabar and vermilion are actually two different pigments, and both of them
slide.
turn black.
Yeah.
I
Amy, go back one slide.
Go back one slide.
Yeah. That's the one she's been talking about.
That's that one still. Okay. Sorry about that, Melanie. Looks like one jumped ahead. But we're back to what you're talking about.
I'm still on the. I keep asking what's being lost to the native people who come to the museum to study these objects made by their ancestors. What is lost to them of their own past, and what is being lost of the overall information that helps us understand a culture. Next slide, please, Amy.
Well, the one we've been looking at. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Man.
What if that's the only hint we've had today? This is a Tlingit elder wearing a clan hat. The clans all have different animals that represent, some characteristics of who that clan is. This particular hat I call cultural collision. It's a perfect example of lost knowledge, of the loss of understanding of the significance of materials and color. Many 19th century artists persisted in using traditional pigments well into the age of synthetic blues and reds to be able to retain the power of vivianite and red ochre, to retain those spiritual properties and protective abilities. But the commodification of color finally overtook the past, and it's left us with simple mimicry of those colors now that is bereft of context and content. It's devoid of spirit and of any spiritual meaning and power. This, at least to me and to other people, is a real problem. People believe that when they don their regalia, that it has the same meaning and potency and power that the regalia of their grandfather had. But I have to question whether you can get that same power out of a bottle of paint that you bought at Michael's, or if you've lost something here in the translation. And I am persistently asking, how do we restore a culture? How do we restore their history with these kinds of losses? How do we fully understand who these people are and what they believed and why they believed certain things? And I keep asking, how did they evolve into the future without this important knowledge of their own past? Next slide.
Yep.
This is it's a contemporary painting by a man named Ray Troll, who's was born and raised in Alaska. He's non-native. It's called the Battle of Old Sitka, and it represents an actual battle that occurred in 1802 between the Tlingits and the Russians. I believe that when something enters the consciousness of the people outside of a culture, that it indicates something important. When I saw this with all of these war helmets painted blue, I think there are two that don't have any blue on them. It really pinged in my brain, and I actually tracked Ray down, and I asked him about this. I asked him how he came to paint all of these helmets blue. And he said, well, that he'd traveled around the world and gone to different collections in museums, and he'd actually photographed and documented each of these, and then came home and reproduced them in this painting. And I said, so every one of these had blue on them, right? And he said, absolutely. And that just thrilled me to death. It helped to affirm my theories about vivianite being used as a protective agent, particularly on warrior gear. But it also helped me to understand that even though we have lost the knowledge about why these colors were used, the outside cultures have embraced the idea that these are the traditional colors of these cultures here. And that maybe through that we can help work on restoring lost cultural knowledge. While you're looking at this picture, I'd like you all to think about these monstrous visages that are painted the blue of death, rising up out of the forest floor and looming out of the mist, and lurching from behind trees. And this is a quote from one of the Russians that were there, hearing a terrific uproar in imitation of the animals that are represented on these helmets. Anytime I think about that, I understand perfectly why the Tlingit won this battle against the Russians. Next slide.
Yep.
This is my tail end here. This is the last slide. It's simply just I painted little circles of all the, well, I think it's 34 of the different vivianite samples that I have. And it's about 4 years out of date, but it just gives you an idea of the range of shades of blue that can be produced with this mineral. Uh-oh, something happened here. What I want to end this with is that in my work, it's been very important to be able to restore lost cultural knowledge. And I have this belief that when knowledge wants to come forward like this, that it's important for us to properly shepherd it into the present and to help bring it forward into the future. And I'm always looking for people who are interested in learning more and in carrying on what I've started here. Being the sole bearer of this knowledge is a moral and cultural responsibility. I have a responsibility to share it properly and to make sure that it goes into the world in the best ways possible. It's incredibly important that we do learn to understand the cultures of the past, because they can teach us so much about who we are now, and it can teach us so much about how we need to be able to survive here on Earth. On that note, I just would like to encourage anybody who's got any questions or has information about, the Northwest Coast and pigments, to contact me. And if you're interested in, in studying or anything, I work with students all the time, and I'm just really eager to share everything that I know. I believe that I've actually had to work with people who hoard their knowledge, and I think that that's a crime. So I want to thank everybody for taking time to listen to me today, and look at all my wonderful pictures.
Thanks,
And
Melonie.
thanks, Amy and Kath, for putting up with my technical glitches today.
Well,
Melonie, go ahead and try to run your video, start your video, so we can at least say hello.
Okay.
I'm just trying to, let's see.
I think I have to sign back in.
You should
Or
look at the
something, I don't
lower,
know.
if you look at the
What do I have to
lower,
do to
okay, so look
accomplish
at your screen, Melonie, in the lower left, it says start video or stop video. Do you have that?
Yeah, I
So
see that.
hit start video. Ta-da!
Okay,
Hey.
There you
let's
are.
see. All I see are a whole bunch of squares. I see a whole bunch of squares. How do I see you guys?
Go to your upper right where it says view. And it'll say either speaker or gallery. If you do
No.
gallery, you see a whole bunch of little tiles. And if you see speaker, you see the person who's speaking.
By the
Oh,
way,
okay, I see that.
yeah, it's on the left if it's on an
There you
iPad.
Hi,
Uh-oh, where did we go?
we're all here.
Hi, can you see me now?
We
Yes.
can.
I can see you, Ken.
Good.
Okay.
So we are at a few minutes past the hour. We have time, I think, for 1 or 2 questions. And then if there are lots of other questions, we can go ahead and Melonie, people can you can choose to answer them or however you want to handle any additional questions. So
I'm happy to answer questions as long as you guys have time.
okay, great.
And, please send questions by email.
Okay, great. Any questions in chat, Amy?
Can somebody just put something in there? Just write hi to me. Make sure it
Mine
works.
still says chat disabled. I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. Oh, I see. I see. Okay, now do it. Nice. Hi, Maggie.
There we go. All right, everyone's saying hi. Any questions for Melonie that you want to add into chat?
Do you have any book recommendations, Melonie?
Oh my gosh, yes. Not about pigments and the Northwest Coast, but about pigments, I cannot. The book that I have actually worn out 4 copies of so far is Philip Ball's Bright Earth.
Oh,
Philip Ball is just an extraordinary brain all the way around, and his knowledge of pigments is very good, and the way he writes is very good. Also, anything by Mikhail Pastoureau, who is just an amazing French academic who has studied the history of color and pigments. Anything by John Gage. John Gage did Color and Culture and a couple of other books. Those are my 3 top picks: Philip Ball, John Gage, and Mikhail Pastoureau. They're the ones that I constantly go back to, and just quite often I read at random, and every time I read them, something new comes forward that I could swear was not in that book ever before when I read it.
Hey, Melonie, Patricia Larinas is asking if you're working with Native groups to transfer this knowledge.
Not at the moment, not working with much of anybody because of the virus. I've worked with individuals, but so far there aren't any cultural groups that are doing this kind of work. I've worked with some of the master carvers to educate them, and they're passing knowledge on through an apprenticeship system. We have a long history of master carvers having apprentices here, and that's how we teach and learn. I have students that have come from all over the US and Canada that right now I'm working with online via Zoom.
Right. So Kate Ellis is asking, are most pigments from minerals?
In Native America, when we're talking about paint, yes. And I don't know if anybody's ever made this qualification before that pigments and paint are something very different from dyes.
Mm.
Paint is a film that lays on the surface of something. The pigments, the elements in the pigment can bond with the substrate, but that's very different from what a dye is. A dye is something that will soak into a substrate and bond with it. So I would encourage everybody to look up, pigments versus dyes, or paints versus dyes, and it helps a little bit in understanding the difference between mineral pigments and plant pigments or other biological pigments, such as those, that are being done with slime mold now, which is way cool.
Hey, Melanie, do you have anything like that on your site? Or I'm wondering if Tilka has something like that on her site.
Actually, Tilka was telling me yesterday about a guy. Well, I've known about this guy, but he's got a program this evening, and he's working with slime mold that use red ochre to paint.
Yeah, it's
Which,
Thomas,
I mean,
Thomas Little. Thomas Little, or a.rural.pen, some of you may know him by, is performing with the band Charming Disaster tonight, and he's doing a demonstration and discussion-ish about his work with slime molds and as ink. It's a collaboration. So that's at Charming Disaster. It's facebook.com/Charming Disaster Band, or YouTube, Charming Disaster, one word, I think. It's also on a.rural.pen Instagram account info, and Wild Pigment Project.
If you want to put it in the chat at all, Tilka, if you can.
Yeah.
Otherwise you have a lot of good information to find it. You want to take one more question,
this is really cool stuff this guy is doing. I mean, it is so science fiction, space agey, but just way cool pigment stuff.
Well, Melanie, we're going to take one more question, and I think it's interesting.
Okay.
Do we know if indigenous cultures manufactured vivianite, or if they just collected it?
Vivianite is a really abundant mineral. There's absolutely no reason to believe that they manufactured it. You can find it almost everywhere on Earth. On average about 6 feet below surface. Again, it forms out of decomposing organic matter. The bottom of just about every lake, pond, marsh, bog in the world is very likely to have vivianite at the bottom of it. If you canoe, or if you're out on the rivers, you'll often see veins of it where the banks have fallen away. Where in places where there's erosion, or where they're cutting a new road. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff. It would be hard in the past, it would have been hard not to find it. Nowadays, almost all of the deposits that I know of are inaccessible because they're on private land, or because there's been a parking lot put on them.
Sounds like a pretty amazing project for somebody, one of you pigment or natural dye people, to take on. Talk about erosion, pollution, environmental impacts, and using vivianite. So somebody better start doing that. If not Melanie already.
Anybody who finds any vivianite, if you do find it, would people please send me, just even a gram or two, and to put in my archive. And I am in the process of donating to the Forbes Pigment Collection, because I've got so many different samples of vivianite from all over the place and from all kinds of origins. I mean, I've even got vivianite from the end stage pipes from sewage treatment plants.
I just want to spotlight you for a minute, Melonie, so everybody can see what the background of Melonie's like a mad scientist. Want to make sure you see that before this is all over. But well, thanks so much, Melonie.
This is just part of my, this is like my daily collection of pigments behind me.
Right. That's totally normal. I mean, everybody's got that behind them when they're on Zoom.
Well,
You're like the pigment queen.
why wouldn't they? I would feel naked without that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, thanks so much, Melonie.
Thank you, Melonie. That was amazing. We have gone ahead and put Melonie's website in the chat, but that will also be on our website, all of her contact information and the 3 different links to her 2 pigment projects, as well as her own art website, are on the Feedback Friday invitation that you received. So all of that's there. And then what I saw in chat was that on Melonie's website, there are references to the books that she was speaking about. I'm sure there's just lots of other really useful information. So we'll just make sure that you all have that. And we'll also be sending that around with the link to our recording today. So I know there's tons more questions. I wish we had a bit more time, but what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about next week and also a couple other opportunities that are coming up. So Melonie, thank you very, very much. It was so amazing. I'm glad we got to see you and really experience the depth and the tenacity of the work that you're doing. It's truly inspiring. It really, really is.
I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice, Kathy. It has dragged me along behind it all these years.
Understood. Understood. Great. All right.
I just really want to thank you guys for, I just really want to thank you guys for doing this for me.
Oh, it was, the pleasure is all ours. Believe me, it is just such a treat. So thank you.
Conversations leading up to this as well. I've
yeah, my brain is kind of exploding with the pigment possibilities. It's great. Okay, I am going to just do a couple of reminders and then also talk about our presenter for next week. Melonie, you might want to try, if you can, to see this one because it's pretty exciting. It takes history and kind of that whole that sort of singular passion like you're doing, but it's a completely different subject in a completely different culture. So it might be kind of interesting for you. But for the reminders, yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that both Amy and I and Porfirio Gutierrez, Sasha Durr, and Abu Bakar Fofana are going to be on a panel at a conference called the Stone Barns Young Farmers and Cooks Conference, which is starts December 8th, 9th, and 10th. And there's a pretty heavy duty lineup of folks who are presenting, and it's got a sliding scale ticket range. So it's pretty affordable and you get to just see some incredible speakers. Our keynote is going to be by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who has been doing work in marine biology and marine conservation, as well as climate change. And there's just a whole realm of things that have to do with really growing and cooking, not so much dyeing, but we have a panel on dyeing, and that's the one that we're going to be on. But I think the entire conference is pretty interesting. We'll go ahead and put that reference in our chat, and we'll probably just have an announcement as well, either in Instagram or on the site. But if you can drop in to watch it, I would highly recommend that you just check it out. It's it's kind of a bunch of allyships that could be happening with us. So it's pretty interesting. Their emphasis is also on Black farmers and people of color. So I think it's going to be, we're going to kind of move out of this sort of, pretty standardized kind of farming environment that we've been thinking about into looking at other potential possibilities. So I'm pretty excited about it. The other thing is that we've got a couple of, I can't believe it's December, but it is December and people are like buying gifts. So we do have some gift suggestions on the site. They're of course well hidden because we only have so much website capability right now, but we do have natural dye eco printing kits from Cara Marie Piazza on the site. We have natural indigo shibori kits from Scrambles Quilt Kristen Arts, who presented just a few weeks ago. And then we were amazingly written up in the New York Times this last weekend. So the little color wheel that we've been selling for a number of years kind of hit the big time, and I've just sort of been packaging color wheels nonstop. We do have still lots in stock. So if you're interested, the New York Times likes it and so do we. And those are available. And then we also have a donations page on our site, and we put this up because a lot of people had been asking, especially in terms of some of the classes that we hold. A lot of times they're fairly high priced because we're trying to pay our instructors basically a living wage. And what we're doing now is there's a scholarship button for both farm and garden and for our workshops. And you can help donate to some of the myriad growers that we've come into contact with, and also some really interesting projects. So if you're so inclined, you can donate as little as you want or as much as you want, and you can also do a monthly donation. So we really would love to encourage you to kind of think of that as a gifting thing. We're basically sending all the money to, and we split it up amongst 5 or 6 different organizations. So we just pool the funds, we split it up. We are just taking the fees that it costs us to process the payments, which I think is about 3 or 4%. And then we also have to take out a little bit for income tax payments, and that's it. So I believe it's 95% of the funds go directly to this pool that then is distributed to the organizations. And we will rotate organizations throughout the year. So if you are an organization or you know of an organization that should come to our attention, please get in contact with us. Okay, I'm going to really quickly, because already 22 minutes past, I'm going to talk about our next week's speaker. Debbie Bamford is going to be joining us from the UK, and her business is called the Mulberry Dyer. She is a historical researcher and dyer of techniques and methods from pre-Renaissance onward, and she's expert in this. So the work that I've seen of Debbie's is phenomenal. She is getting colors that we could only dream of given our knowledge and our techniques. She's really, again, someone who has dived deep into Renaissance and pre-Renaissance dye techniques and perfected them. Debbie and Botanical Colors are putting together a 5-day turkey red class probably in February of this coming year. And so, they're going to be up at midnight instructing us as we go through creating these, all the different steps. I think there's tons of steps in order to get a quality of red that we have just not seen in modern day textile dyeing, because we don't know how to do it. We don't have the rancid oil and the sheep dung and all the other weird, remember that when I put out my sheep dung question a few weeks ago? Yeah. So Debbie's going to be providing us all of this prepared fabric, and we'll go through it step by step with her as she and her husband are in England instructing us, and we're up at the crack of dawn trying to figure out how to do this. So it's going to really be fun. I hope you can join us, and we'll have that listed probably within a week or so on the site.
Kathy?
Yes.
You kind of forgot a really important part of what you told me about this presentation as well.
Oh, yes. So Debbie is going to be time traveling. I mean, not just time zone traveling, like century time traveling. She will appear in costume, and it's not even costume, like this is who she is now, and be giving her speech. So it's going to be really fun. We hope you can join us. And that's it for our Feedback Friday. If you guys want to unmute and say hello and goodbye, and thank you for spending the extra time with us today. We're so happy that Melonie was able to spend time with us and give us that amazing presentation. So thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bless you
Bye.
guys. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Melonie.
Thank you, everyone. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Hey, Kathy, you can stop recording.
Okay.